Now, breaking news, healthcare scorecard. 14 million more Americans could be without health insurance coverage next year under the Obamacare replacement plan pushed by the GOP leadership and the White House. That's the assessment of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which says the number of uninsured could skyrocket in subsequent years. Evidence deadline today. The Trump administration must give Congress evidence on the president's claim that he was wiretapped by President Obama. The White House now says wiretapping doesn't necessarily mean wiretapping, but a top Trump aide says it could mean surveillance via microwaves. So what do they mean? Security breach 2.5 years after a knife-wielding intruder jumped the White House fence and made it into the mansion. Another fence jumper makes it hundreds of yards across the ground. So what happened to the stepped-up security? And snow marches in. Two storms sweep the country, about to merge into a monster, bringing snow from Washington through New England. New York could get 20 inches with winds up to 50 miles an hour. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. Breaking news, a punch in the gut for Republican congressional. Breaking news, a punch in the gut for top Republican congressional leaders and the White House. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that if their Obamacare replacement plan goes through, 14 million more people would be uninsured next year. That would rise to 24 million people a decade from now, while federal deficits would be reduced by more than $300 billion. The president today accused the news media of making Obamacare look so good all of a sudden. He insists Obamacare is imploding, but admits it could take years for health care prices to come down under a replacement plan. Today is the deadline set by the House Intelligence Committee for the Trump administration to show evidence of the president's claim that President Obama wiretapped him. Press Secretary Sean Spicer now says the president doesn't believe that President Obama personally wiretapped him, but senior advisor Kellyanne Conway has more outlandish accusations suggesting wider surveillance via televisions and microwaves. Some lawmakers are calling for the White House to essentially put up or shut up. Senator John McCain says the president could clear this up in a minute. Let's go to the White House right now, where Sean Spicer is introducing the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, getting their reaction to the Congressional Budget Office report.
We'll obviously have more tomorrow as we go forward. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Tom Price, the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you so much. It was a good cabinet meeting that we had. During that cabinet meeting, the CBO report came out. I think it's important that we ask the question, compared to what? And the fact of the matter is that this is about real people. It's about real people's lives. It's about the coverage, the health coverage that they have, but the health care that they receive. And the fact of the matter is that right now, current law, we've got individuals who have health coverage but no health care. And it's incredibly important to appreciate that. In fact, the care coverage numbers are, in fact, going down. If Obamacare, if the ACA went away, the fact of the matter is that there would be 20 million who would not have coverage. The CBO looked at a portion of our plan, but not the entire plan. In fact, the entire plan includes the regulatory apparatus that we've got the ability to use at Health and Human Services that the previous administration used significantly, but we want to use it to make certain that patients are helped and that costs are decreased. They also ignored completely the other legislative activities that we'll be putting into place that will make certain that we have an insurance market that actually works. So we disagree strenuously with the report that was put out. We believe that our plan will cover more individuals at a lower cost and give them the choices that they want for the coverage that they want for themselves and for their family, not that the government forces them to buy. I'm pleased to be joined as well by the OMB Director, Mr. Mulvaney.
Thanks very much. And I want to reiterate that we haven't had a chance to read the entire report yet. We're seeing some of the same top-line summaries that you folks have seen. I want to talk a little bit about one of the parts that I've seen, though, that deals beyond coverage. And that deals with premium costs. One of the things we've said about this proposal from the very beginning was that we believed, for some reasons that have been basic tenets of Republican conservative thought for a long time, that competition lowers costs. And what the CBO just told us is that's exactly right. The numbers that I've seen in the first glance is that the CBO says that premiums will go down by at least 10% with this plan. So it just confirms a lot of things that Tom and I have been talking about. publicly, which is that we really do think that these ideas of taking market competition, putting it back into healthcare, getting government out of the way, will do what it does in healthcare, what it does with everything else. Every place else where the market is allowed to function, quality goes up and costs go down. And what I think if you look for something the CBO may have gotten right in this report, it's that the premiums are actually going to come down in cost. So with that, I think we'll take a couple questions.
Secretary Price, you said this is about people. You said this is about people
getting coverage, but the CBO report says 14 million people will end up without insurance next year. How does that actually help more patients?
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at that, it's virtually impossible to have that number occur. We're not certain. Again, we haven't been able to read the report.
They're not credible.
Well, you just look at the numbers. There are 8 million people, 9 million people who are on the exchange currently. I'm not sure how they're going to get to 14 million people uninsured, if that's what they say, with only 8 million people on the exchange. There are individuals, I guess, that they assume that are on Medicaid who aren't paying anything in the Medicaid system, who are going to not take the Medicaid policy just because the mandate ended or something happened. It's just not believable is what we would suggest. And we'll look at the numbers and see.
But Mr. Secretary, without that mandate to buy coverage, would you not concede that millions of people will not have insurance under this plan?
No, I wouldn't concede that at all.
You
because
would not say millions of people are going to lose
no,
health insurance?
because the fact of the matter is they're going to be able to buy a coverage policy that they want for themselves and for their family. They're going to have the kind of choices that they want. You think about the numbers that the top line on CBO report today. It basically says that we'll be right back at pre-Obamacare status with about 40 million people uninsured in this country. We believe that the plan that we're putting in place is going to insure more individuals than currently are insured. So we think that CBO simply has it wrong.
Think about one of the things that Tom just said, because it bears repeating. The CBO score assumes that if you are on Medicaid today, that you choose to get off Medicaid after the mandate goes away. Does that make sense to anybody? That you're on a free program, because the plan doesn't get rid of Medicaid expansion, right? So what the CBO has told you is, if you are on Medicaid, that the day the mandate goes away, you're going to voluntarily get off Medicaid. Please tell me if anybody thinks that makes sense. So
you do scale down Medicaid over time.
we do, but that's not. But that's not the CBO is saying it happens on day one, which is just absurd.
The CBO, you seem to agree with the CBO estimate that premiums will go down 10%. They got to that estimate by saying that fewer older people will be getting coverage because of the age-adjusted premiums. That the older people who have higher costs typically will drop off of the insurance marketplace. Do you agree with that estimate of the CBO that fewer older adults will have coverage because of this age-adjusted?
No, we don't. And then I would point once again to the fact that apparently what CBO looked at was simply the bill that's pending before Congress. It didn't look at the regulatory reforms that we're going to put into place. It didn't look at the state innovation grants. It didn't look at the flexibility that we're going to allow the states, because that's what the states are demanding and asking for, so that they can care for their most vulnerable population. And it didn't look at all of the pieces of legislation that are also pending out there that we call on our friends on the other side of the aisle to help us reform the insurance market so that we can provide for greater choices and greater competition.
So why not do it all at once so we don't have all these questions about, oh, just wait, we've got more stuff coming. Why not do it all at once so we understand the full package, all phases?
Well, it's being rolled out all at once. The fact of the matter is we're working on the regulations right now. In fact, we've had a proposed rule that's been out there to narrow the window so that insurers are able to stay in markets that they're having to pull out. Remember, 1/3 of the counties in this country, 1/3 of the counties, over 1,000 counties, only have one insurer offering coverage on the exchanges. 5 states only have one insurer offering coverage on the exchanges. You tell me that that's what the plan was. The fact is that those folks have no choice whatsoever. The federal government has destined them to only have one opportunity to purchase coverage, and if that's not what they want, then tough luck. That's not our plan. Our plan is to allow individuals the opportunity to purchase the kind of coverage that they want for themselves and their family in a market that allows them an array of choices so it suits them, not what the government tells them to purchase.
Are you encouraging lawmakers to disregard this report? Or
No.
what are you asking them?
We will read the report, look into the report beyond the top lines, and we'll have further comment tomorrow and talk with our colleagues about why we believe the entire plan that we have recommended moving forward and adopting is one that will provide greater opportunity for folks to purchase the kind of coverage that they want and put patients and families and doctors in charge of health care and not the federal government.
Secretary Price, they're going to wake up tomorrow morning and see a headline that says all these people lost coverage.
All right, Tom Price, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Mick Mulvaney, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, totally rejecting the Congressional Budget Office report, which says under the Republican legislation now introduced, supported by the White House, supported by the Speaker, 14 million more people would be uninsured under the legislation as they currently have insurance. 14 million more would be uninsured in 2018, a year from now. And over the next 10 years, an estimated 52 million people would be uninsured compared with the 28 million who would lack insurance that year under the current law. Let's get some more on this blistering assessment of the impact of the Republicans' Obamacare replacement plan. Tom Price saying we disagree strongly. The report is not believable. CNN Sunderland Surfati is up on Capitol Hill. So Sunderland, walk us through the report with specifics.
Well, Wolf, certainly these numbers are much worse for Republican leaders on Capitol Hill than what they were expecting earlier today, showing that millions of Americans, as you said, could potentially be losing their coverage if this Republican plan is signed into law. Now, the top lines of the CBO report, the nonpartisan CBO report just out in this last hour, the big top line number in 2018, 14 million more people would be uninsured under this legislation than under the current law. That would rise to 21 million in 2020 and then a staggering 26 million by the year 2026. The CBO also predicts here that the legislation will reduce the federal deficits by $337 billion over the course of that 2017 to 2026 period. Now, before this report came out, leading up into this, we heard from many Republican leaders preemptively dismissing and downplaying this report, suggesting that the work that the CBO does, it does not always lead to accurate results. Certainly, we will likely hear from more Republican leaders this same sort of rhetoric as they sort through this latest report. But Wolf, Democrats already reacting, calling it an enormous blow to the fate of this bill tonight. Wolf?
And very quickly, the CBO report also says, and Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, made a point of this, that they estimate that over the next 10 years, the federal deficits would be reduced by $337 billion because of the elimination of a lot of the taxes that are part of Obamacare. That's a very significant number, someone.
That is a very significant number, and I expect we will certainly hear a lot of that in a few days. Also interesting that he was specifically emphasizing that premiums will go down by about 10%, and that's according to this latest CBO report. Wolf.
All right, Sunderland's up on Capitol Hill. Let's go to our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly. He's getting more reaction to the CBO report. What are you learning, Phil?
Yeah, that's right, Wolf. And you got a little bit of a flavor from it, from Secretary Price, from Director Mulvaney. But I want to read what Speaker Paul Ryan put out. Obviously, he is essentially the grandfather of this plan, kind of put it all into motion and put it all into gear. And he says this report confirms that the American Health Care Act will lower premiums and improve access to quality, affordable care. Under Obamacare, we have seen how government-mandated coverage does not equal access to care, and now the law is collapsing. This is the most important point, I think, Wolf. Our plan is not about forcing people to buy expensive one-size-fits-all coverage. It is about giving more people more choices and better access to a plan they want and can afford. And that's going to be the message you see going forward repeatedly from Republican officials. This is about access. This is not about mandates. This is not about Medicaid expansion, automatically putting people onto rolls or enrolling individuals. That's not kind of ideologically how they wanted to go. That's not legislatively how they wanted to go. But Wolf, I want to give you some flavor from some other individuals who are paying attention to this. A Democratic aide texted me, "This is significantly worse than even we expected. We'll be on offense through 2018 if they keep going down this road." And one other quick one that's important, a GOP official who's been very supportive of this plan going forward, the House plan specifically, texted me simply, "Oof." we can recover, but this is not a good look. Republicans very cognizant of the fact that this top line number is not what they wanted. It's higher than they expected, and it certainly creates problems for them going forward, problems that they're going to have to try and get around or get past in the days ahead if they want this bill on the floor in the House with an opportunity to pass as soon as next week. Wolf.
And Phil, just to be precise, the Congressional Budget Office, to a lot of folks who aren't familiar with this is nonpartisan and is led right now by someone appointed by the Republican leadership.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The individual running the CBO right now, not just appointed by Republican leadership, appointed by then Budget Committee Chairman Tom Price, now the Health and Human Services Secretary. This is an individual they thought ideologically that lined up better with them. But I think an important point on the CBO that I continually hear from Republicans, they believe because their bill doesn't include mandates, because their bill does not include an expansion of the Medicaid program, that the models that the CBO uses to be able to identify and justify coverage simply won't line up with their bill no matter what. You saw them preemptively talking about that over the days ahead. That is something you are going to hear a lot more from here on out, Wolf.
Phil Mattingly up on Capitol Hill. Thanks. Let's go back to our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, who's getting more reaction. What else are you picking up, Jeff?
Well, if there's no question that the top line number here in terms of the number of millions of Americans who would be uninsured is not good for this process at all. But the White House, I am told, is going to seize on the number that Phil was talking about just a second ago, $337 billion in deficit savings. They believe that that is a good step forward here. They believe that that could help get some of these outside conservative groups more in line on board with this. But the question here is, how does the White House address the CEO? You did not hear, or the CBO, excuse me, you did not hear either the secretary there or the OMB director say these numbers aren't believable. They say we disagree with the numbers, but they did not attack the CBO per se. That is because the head of the CBO, Keith Hall, was appointed by Secretary Price, as Phil was just saying right there. So the White House is still going to make a decision on how aggressively to go after that. But certainly they believe this is going to make it much more difficult to get some of those conservative Republicans on board here. But they believe they can still hold it together. We're likely to hear from the president tomorrow on this, if not yet this evening. We don't have anything planned from him yet, but they expected it to be a challenge here, and this is certainly more than a challenge, but look for them to press that deficit savings number as one upside in this otherwise tough report.
Yeah, they like the deficit savings number. They hate the number of the people who will be without health insurance coverage. So they've got a little bit of both worlds over there. Art, stand by. I want to bring in Democratic Congresswoman Kathleen Rice of New York. She's a member of the Homeland Security Committee. She's been watching all of this very closely. Congresswoman, let's discuss this Congressional Budget Office estimate right now, this report. And let's get to the part that the White House likes, that it would reduce federal deficits by $337 billion over the next 10 years. That's a huge savings.
Well, there's no question about it, and it's not a surprise that they would want to focus on that. What I find so interesting is that you had Tom Price focusing on the number of uninsured rising over the next year to 14 million and saying that could not be right. It's just an impossible reality. And then you had Mick Mulvaney talking about how great it is that the premiums are going to go down. You can't have it both ways. You can't say that the CBO report is accurate when it's something good for us and bad when it's not. And look, the CBO is only able to look at what they're given. And you heard Tom Price say there that, well, we're still working on the regulations, and they didn't take the regulations into account, and that's because they didn't see them. So, look, I think it's interesting that they can act, that they're a little shocked. I think over the past couple of days, you've heard a lot of Republicans coming out and saying, well, you know, the CBO report really isn't that accurate. You can't really rely on it. That's not really what they're meant to do, is to weigh in on things like that. And yet that's exactly what they're meant to do. And they're shining a light on the Republican plan, and I hope people are paying attention.
The new Republican plan would leave more people uninsured, according to this Congressional Budget Office report, a reduction of, they say, 24 million insured people by the year 2026. So from your perspective, and you're a Democrat, you oppose the Republican plan. What could that mean?
Well, first of all, it's an assault on seniors. It increases cost for seniors, decreases cost for younger people, when it should be the opposite. Your health care costs grow and your health care needs grow as you grow. So that's number one. It's an assault on women because it defunds Planned Parenthood. and you have more women on Medicare and Medicaid, and so it's going to affect them. It decimates Medicaid. That's where the savings comes from, but it's at the cost of giving people the health services that they need. And specifically, if you look at one of the biggest health crises we're facing here all across this country, with the opioid addiction that we have in every state across this country, it's going to take away care from people who are suffering from the disease of drug addiction. So it's just going to be devastating all across the board.
Let me read to you what then President-elect Trump told the Washington Post this past January, just days before the inauguration. We're going to have insurance for everybody. There was a philosophy in some circles that if you can't pay for it, you don't get it. That's not going to happen with us. People covered under the law can expect to have great health care. It will be in a much simplified form, much less expensive, and much better. Do you think this plan comes close to delivering on those promises by the president?
Not even close. And I think that you're going to see Donald Trump trying to walk back those statements 6 months from now, a year from now, if this is able to pass. And, you know, he was so critical of President Obama when President Obama made this statement that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. And yet he's doing the same thing. So really, what are we talking about here? What we really need is straight talk from people in government. People stop using politics. You know, look, I consider myself a logical person. This plan does not make logical sense. I'm not an ideologue, and I think most of the people who came up with this plan are ideologues who see an opportunity now to basically say survival of the fittest. If you have money, you're going to be able to get access to quality health care, and if you don't, you're out of luck.
Do you see this Republican plan as the Ryan plan or the Trump plan?
There's no question that Paul Ryan has been a much more outspoken voice when it comes to health care reform. He's very wonky when it comes to that. I don't think anyone could use the word wonk together with President Trump. So I would say that most of the specifics here are probably Paul Ryan, and it's going to be up to him to get it through the House. But, you know, look, Republicans are facing the terrible choice in the House of having to vote for a bill possibly that they know will never pass in the Senate and can be used like a noose around their neck in 2018. So they've got some problems up ahead.
Congresswoman, I want you to stay with us. We're also standing by. We just heard that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, they're about to make a statement, answer reporters' questions. We'll have that and a lot more right after this. Congresswoman Kathleen Rice of New York. She's a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. We're following breaking news, Congresswoman. I want you to stand by. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates 14 million Americans could be without health insurance next year under the Obamacare replacement plan pushed by the White House, and that could rise to 24 million Americans in a decade. As we stand by to hear from the Democratic leaders of the House and the Senate, we'll continue our conversation with Kathleen Rice. But first, I want to get some developments. Today's the day the Trump administration is supposed to provide congressional investigators with evidence to back up the president's claim that he was wiretapped by President Obama. Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, no evidence we've seen yet, but the White House is scrambling to come up with some new explanations.
They are indeed, Wolf, and we did hear some of those evolving explanations today here at the White House, but no evidence specifically from the president. He was asked about it a couple times. He deflected those questions, and there's no word tonight if the Department of Justice has complied with the intelligence committees to turn over any evidence, if any even exists. President Trump had his predecessor on his mind again today at the White House.
It's a little bit like President Obama. When he left, people liked him. When he was here, people didn't like him so much. That's the way life goes. That's human nature. The fact is, Obamacare is a disaster.
He was talking health care, not his explosive allegation of President Obama spying on Trump Tower. Asked about that, Mr. Trump fell silent.
Will your Justice Department comply with the Intelligence Committee's request? Thank you, guys.
The Department of Justice had until today to turn over any evidence, if any exists, to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees for their investigation into any contacts between Russian operatives and the Trump campaign. The White House would not say whether any evidence would be produced. Yet the explanation has evolved over the last 9 days. and did so again today.
I think there's two things that are important about what he said. I think recognizing that it's the Obama, he doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally.
After saying last week the president's tweets about the extraordinary allegations spoke for themselves, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said this today.
There were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. That is a widely reported activity that occurred back then. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities.
But that's not true. It was not widely reported surveillance took place in the campaign. And the president stated the wiretapping allegation as fact in this tweet that started it all. How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate, bad or sick guy. At his first cabinet meeting today, the president again brushed aside questions.
Any comments on the wiretapping? Did you reply?
But one of his top advisors, Kellyanne Conway, muddied the already confusing waters over surveillance during a weekend interview in her New Jersey living room.
What I can say is there are many ways to surveil each other now, unfortunately.
Do you believe
there was an article this week that talked about how you can surveil someone through their phones, through their, certainly through their television sets, any number of different ways, and microwaves that turn into cameras, etc.
On CNN's New Day, she tried clarifying her remarks to Chris Cuomo, saying she didn't have any evidence the president was being spied on through a microwave or any other device.
I'm not Inspector Gadget. I don't believe people are using the microwave to spy on the Trump campaign. However, I'm not in the job of having evidence. That's what investigations are for.
Senator John McCain on CNN's State of the Union said the president owes Americans an explanation.
The president has one of two choices, either retract or to provide the information that the American people deserve, because if his predecessor violated the law, President Obama violated the law, we've got a serious issue here, to say the least.
So asked again at that White House briefing if the president would follow the advice of John McCain there and disclose all of this to the American people, and White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said they are still going to wait for the outcome of that House and Senate intelligence report. He didn't rule it out, but Wolf, this could be one of those many conspiracy theories that have been floated out around this White House that never quite seem to have an end to them. Wolf.
All right, Jeff Zeleny at the White House, thanks very much. Let me just remind our viewers, momentarily we expect to hear from the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. You see the microphones there. They'll be going up to the microphones to react to this Congressional Budget Office cost estimate on the Republican leadership's plans for a new health care law to repeal and replace Obamacare. Among the estimates that 14 million more people would be uninsured next year if the new law were to be enacted. We're going to have that live coverage of that's coming up momentarily. In the meantime, I want to get back to Democratic Congresswoman Kathleen Rice of New York, a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, let's talk about what we just heard in Jeff Zelny's report. You heard the press secretary, Sean Spicer, saying today the president used the word wiretapping in those early Saturday morning tweets to broadly mean surveillance, saying it spans a whole host of surveillance-type options. Do you accept that explanation?
No, and this is one of the biggest problems with President Trump. He says whatever comes out of his mouth. He doesn't think about it. He doesn't measure his words. He doesn't care whether what he's saying is true or not. But when you accuse a president of breaking the law in this way that would create a constitutional crisis, the likes of which we have never seen in our country's history, I think, you have to be responsible for the words that you say. Now, all day we've been hearing, whether it's Kellyanne Conway or Sean Spicer, saying, no, that's not what he meant. But we have to take him at his word. That's exactly what he meant. He even went so far as to call President Obama a bad, sick guy. And he can't back it up with any evidence. You know, we don't have to look any further than John McCain, Senator McCain, who said, look, either retract what you said or show the evidence. And what's really important is that we focus on the insidious nature of what he's saying. Forget about what it says about President Obama, and everyone agrees that this didn't happen. But what is he saying to the American people about the faith that they should have in their government? What he is saying is the government as you know it is something akin to what you see in Russia, where every single electronic device is being monitored. There's no such thing as privacy anymore. It's Big Brother in all of your business, and he knows that's not true. And I just think that the devastating consequences of these words, and, you know, it's not enough to say, okay, after I've made this explosive allegation, I'm going to send my minions out to clean up the mess. That's not enough. That's not enough. You're the President of the United States. You have to be held accountable for the things that you say.
The White House counselor, as you point out, Kellyanne Conway, she told the Bergen County Record in New Jersey, and these are her words, there are many ways to surveil each other. I guess the question is this, Congresswoman, is the Trump administration, the Trump White House now moving the goalposts?
They do it every single day. I watched that interview, Wolf, and I was dumbfounded.
The interview with Kellyanne
believe.
Conway, which interview?
Where she was talking about a microwave. I mean, I've never heard such a thing. And she just talks. And in fact, it was so interesting because it's so typical of people who go out to speak for President Trump. They're asked a question and they never answer it. She was asked, do you believe what Donald Trump said about Barack Obama? And she said, what I can say is there's all these different forms of surveillance, and including microwaves that turn into cameras. I mean, no one believes that stuff, nor should they. But it shows the lengths that people in this administration will go to detract from some of the most outrageous things that this president is saying. And this is the other area that concerns me. When we have a real tragedy here, when, God forbid, we have to deal with a real issue of national and international import, whose words are going to be credible in this administration? So far, I haven't heard anyone who actually comes out and says, you know what, he probably misspoke, he shouldn't have said it. No one wants to go that far and say that. And that's going to be of concern when there's a big issue.
Here's what the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer at his briefing today said. He said that the president was referring to the Obama administration broadly and not accusing the President Obama, of personal involvement. But let's look at what the president.
But Sean Spicer can say that, Wolf. But remember the tweet.
All right, hold on a second. Congress, I'm going to read to you 2 of those 4 early morning Saturday tweets. Now he's saying he's referring to the Obama administration, but the president tweeted, "I'd bet a good lawyer could make a great case out of the fact that President Obama was tapping my phones in October just prior to election." Then he tweeted, "How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon, Watergate, bad or sick guy." So now he's saying he was referring to the Obama administration as a whole, not necessarily the President Obama, but you saw those 2 tweets where he's specifically referring to President Obama.
Any rational human being reading those tweets knows exactly what Donald Trump meant. He was talking about President Obama, and you will remember that these tweets happened shortly after the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, had decided to recuse himself from looking into, from being involved in any of the investigation involving the Russian hacking during the 2016 election. And this is what Donald Trump does. When he gets if something happens that he doesn't like, he reacts this way, and he says outrageous things, and he just knows that, you know what, I'll just leave that out there for a couple of days until something else happens, and then people will forget it. I'll act like I never said it, and then we'll move on. But it's not enough for the American people to move on when you are accusing the former president of personally wiretapping your phones. That's what those tweets said, bad or sick guy. He didn't say Obama hired bad people who did bad things. He spoke specifically about Barack Obama, which I think is probably unprecedented in the annals of presidential history.
Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to obviously stay on top of this story. Kathleen Rice of New York, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, we're standing by. The Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate, they're about to react to the Congressional Budget Office cost estimate on the Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, jointly, they'll be going to those microphones. Our special coverage right here in the Situation Room continues after a quick break.